Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Alex Rappaport, CEO and co-founder of ZwitterCo, a company that develops membranes that are immune to irreversible fouling and enable treatment and reuse of the world's toughest waste waters. Alex, I'm so excited to chat with you as we were discussing before the show. Fascinated about sustainability technology and we all want to be more sustainable and want to help and reuse resources or repurpose things, but it's hard, and the mechanics of doing it are more difficult than I think a lot of us maybe understand. And so overly just excited to learn more about your experience in building it and really, getting it into a place that, people are adopting it and having real positive effects. So before we get into all of that, what were you doing before you started the company?
Absolutely. And Julian, great to meet you. Great to be on the show here. Thank you so much for having us. So if we really rewind the clock, even before there was a ZwitterCo, even before I knew what membranes were and what the promise of this technology was, I was a river raft guide. So I used to teach stand-up whitewater paddleboarding, kayaking, rafting on the Potomac River just outside of DC, Virginia area. So a lot of my early experiences were outdoors, right? Working with campers, working with counselors on all sorts of fun adventure sports. So
Yeah.
that was really one of the sort of touching moments that said, when I end up pursuing some professional path, it's got to be in sustainable technology. I have to find a way to combine exciting breakthroughs in engineering with the fervor and fun and challenges that come from entrepreneurship. And what I ended up stumbling on was this class of new filtration materials that can really change the economics, the opportunity, the reliability of doing wastewater treatment, and enabling reuse in applications where there's a really painful, acute need for both water access, lower cost of treatment, and resiliency against the impending changes that are coming from water scarcity and changes in regional regulations, and to be able to provide the tools that can help people make those decisions practical and affordable. It's a really exciting place for the company to be at. So
Yeah.
happy to dive in on any part of how we sort of make this happen.
Yeah. Well, do you have any, anecdotal stories about seeing wastewater in areas that maybe you weren't expecting it or being encountered it? Obviously you're somebody who loves nature and loves to kind of, have the experience of activities in nature, which I love. And I grew up on the kind of the countryside of where my town was from. And so obviously I love the outdoors and I think it's one of the easiest ways to have fun as a kid, especially, and the least expensive. It's just to go play in some mud and some water on a riverbank. But yeah, any anecdotal stories of where you were impacted by it personally?
I'm sure this will end up being a footnote in the book that gets written at some point. I actually got giardia from
No
contaminated
way.
water in the Potomac River. Yeah, I spent so much time there. It was sort of a known potential concern, but I would say that is probably the first direct exposure I had to realizing the water that we interact with. Right, if you're going to the ocean, if you're going to rivers, if you're just sort of in nature, that water still has a relationship with the rest of the industrial world that we live in, and the experience just sort of compounded from there. One of the other moments that I actually remember before the company was founded, and it was pretty interesting, pretty a sort of developmental moment, was while I was at Tufts studying environmental engineering, there was an opportunity to go tour Deer Island, which is one of the massive wastewater treatment centers that
Yeah.
covers a lot of the municipal sewage and wastewater that comes out of the Massachusetts area. And we don't think about what happens when the water goes down the drain, right? You turn on your shower, you turn on your sink, you think about all the food that you interact with, manufactured products you interact with, but we don't think about how much water goes into those processes and where it all goes when it's done. But to get to see the scale of how much water we process and how much contamination or industrial
Yeah.
byproducts end up in the feat of civil and environmental engineering that helps us get to this continuous process of making it safe enough to put back into the environment, or doing the best job we can.
Yeah.
Again, it's just sort of out of sight, out of mind until it's not, until there isn't enough water, or until the costs really change. So having a
Yeah.
chance to see the infrastructure that exists, it was really impactful for me. I didn't appreciate
Yeah.
the scale until you saw it
Yeah.
in real life.
Yeah, I had a similar trip when I was younger, and it was fascinating to me that some water was unable to be reused because of the contaminants that people were putting into it with everyday products, and so it made me personally conscious on like, don't put certain things in the toilet or down the sink, especially like
Oh
oil,
yeah,
right? Don't put any hot oil or anything like that in your pipes because it's so difficult to then repurpose that water outside of like human impact or actually taking a step back here. how much, if you, I don't know if you statistically know a percentage, but how much is human impact directly related to the inability to reuse water, or I guess maybe the inefficiency to reuse some water, and what can we do about it, or the things that we can do?
So there's definitely a world in which there's a direct relationship between what we call human waste or sanitary waste and how that affects the treatment infrastructure we have in this country around the world. One of those anecdotes you mentioned, what shouldn't we flush down the drain? Right? You hear about wipes, you hear about a lot of the fat. You don't want bacon grease going down your kitchen sink. Well, not to nauseate any potential listeners here, but if you ever have a chance to Google fatberg, the you know, Boeing 747 sized icebergs of fat and congealed crap that ends up in lots of
Oh
sewers all
man,
around major metropolitan centers. Those small incremental impacts that we each have in our day-to-day decisions, things that go down the drain, they will aggregate, they will accumulate.
yeah,
They can be a huge headache, it can be a real civil burden on treatment infrastructure. And unfortunately, that is just sort of a direct how people, the behavior we take towards our waste and we think about our water. And, again, it's easy to make it disappear sometimes, but there is more ramification to it than that. In the sphere that ZwitterCo operates, there's sort of a different way that we think about the human interaction. So a lot of the facilities, a lot of the customers that our tools are deployed in are in big manufacturing centers. So whether you're making bioprocessed or biomanufactured materials, the meat and poultry industry, dairy, whether you're treating the leachate from landfills or whether you're in fuel ethanol plants, these large facilities that make the food, fuel, manufactured goods and services we interact with, a lot of them need way more water on a total poundage basis than the actual product that's produced. It's something like 5.5 gallons of water per bird in the meat and poultry industry. It's like 2 to 1 up to 10 to 1 sometimes the amount of water that comes out for petroleum extraction. So all these industries that we think of, our consumer, our sort of purchasing habits, there's in the whole spectrum of sustainable decision making, there's the energy inputs, there's the waste inputs, but all of these processes need a lot of water too.
wow.
And you think about folks trying to get more conservative or conscientious with their water usage, that's going to be a really big lever when we think about the growth of sustainable industries. Is water is one of those really pivotal inputs and outputs to any of those manufactured processes.
Yeah. Describe the technology a little bit. What enables your piece of technology to be able to hyper filtrate, a lot of the water? And I love the idea of reusing water, especially for agriculture and aggregation, because maybe the water is not good enough to consume directly, but through a different medium, it can still be useful and valuable. What about the technology allows it to be reused for these different purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to think about a filter, right, the closest homegrown analogy is your coffee filter, right?
Yeah.
Semi-permeable barrier that extracts things based on the size of the pores. If it's too big, it gets caught and retained. If it's too small, it passes through. And your coffee filter takes out coffee grounds. It passes the water, the caffeine, the color compounds. Um, if you took a coffee filter and you rubbed canola oil or bike grease or some other organic, thick mixture, you would not get much permeation through that coffee filter. You get a lot of coffee sputtering out the top of your machine, but you're not going to actually have fluid that passes through it. And that's what happens to filters. They clog. And in the world of industrial filtration, you have some industries that there are well adopted practices for using membrane based technologies for separation. A lot of surface water, municipal water, seawater treatment, a lot of that's done with membranes. But membranes where you try to put them in places that clog really fast are basically inoperable. Really heavy
Yeah.
cleaning penalties, a lot of downtime, you're throwing them away all the time, and it just becomes uneconomical. So ZwitterCo's technology, our filters, are made from this new class of materials, these new polymers that are basically non-stick. Not only do they provide a surface where organic contaminants won't end up aggregating or adhering, but the pore network themselves is actually incredibly non-stick. So if you were trying to filter out some industrial waste stream, even if something was small enough to make it inside our pores, it would be as though it was in a water slide or a flume, where it wouldn't reach the pore walls. It would just sort of pass its way all the way through the membrane, because the membrane has this ability to sort of always stay hydrated and never let itself get stuck or clogged to the things that it's filtering. So because the membrane doesn't clog, all these applications that have orders of magnitude higher organic loading or organic contamination than you would ever expect to want to use a membrane for, we can open the door to the precision, the reliability of membrane-based treatment, and
Yeah.
often that is one step closer to now you've purified that water to the point where it has a purpose on site other than just going down the drain. Sometimes you clean it enough just to wash down floors or tanks or trucks. Sometimes you go all the way to potable and you really want to reuse it as a input to the process so the plant doesn't need as much fresh water. But you can't start that exercise of how far do I want to treat it until you have the tools that can start getting some of those tough to treat contaminants out.
And so it functions similar to, say, a coffee filter where the pores allow some things to pass through the medium, but maybe not everything. Do you have to continue to iterate on the technology if you start working with different industries, or does the technology essentially kind of travel with most different, say, I guess, compounds, fluids, or whatever that it's going through? What's that process like?
Yeah, very, very good question. So the flagship product that ZwitterCo has now had commercial for a couple of years is working for us in a handful of pretty tough industries. So we have installations in dairy wastewater treatment, in manure treatment, in food waste management, in landfills. We have it in bioprocessing. So there's definitely a breadth of organic-based separations that the current product is really effective with. But when we think about the vast array of water and wastewater challenges across all sorts of industries, you're going to have to separate different kinds of things, and you want to do so with different efficiency. Sometimes you want to focus on the bigger compounds and leave the salt and the sugar in. Sometimes you want to get all the way down to ultra pure water, and you have to take out very, very fine molecular separations.
Mm-hmm.
So ZwitterCo's flagship product has membranes that are about 1 nanometer wide in their pore structure. So 1 nanometer is like, 1,000 to 10,000 times thinner than the width of a human hair, right? It's very small. So we're taking out dissolved species, we're taking out emulsions. But if you want to take out things like salt or sugar, typically you'd rely on something like a reverse osmosis membrane or something that's doing ionic-based separation. So when we think about our future as a company, the class of materials that we use has a lot of opportunity to not just build the one product or the current iteration, but many different tools that can do separations with different characteristics. So we think of that as some of our growth stories, taking this really high-performing class of materials and creating all the tools that the world needs to best manage their water.
Yeah. And just kind of discussing around sustainability technology and especially water technology. One, how long does it take to get the product up and running? Because I'm assuming that there's just a lot of barriers and a lot of red tape that you have to go through to get something, the ability where it affects humans. And also, I guess the products that humans consume or interact with. And then secondly, why do some of these products not pass, a certain threshold of adoptability? Is it the difficulty that it has to, do to get clients or customers, or is it really that red tape? Why do some of them fail in their storyline?
So on the topic of how long does it take, it sounds like there's maybe two questions in there. One around just scaling any technology, bringing it to market, and the path it might have to go through from a manufacturability, regulatory exercises. And then there's, once you have a technology, how long does it take for someone to start using it? What's the process of selling it and actually getting all of that go-to-market momentum building? So I'll maybe address both questions here. On the first, when we first interacted with this technology, it was in prototype stage, right? There had been laboratory data, there had been prototypes built, but it was designed still with the resources and with the industry knowledge that you have in an academic setting, right, in a research lab. And the inventor of our technology, Dr. Aisha Asatakan, is a brilliant researcher in the field of high-performance polymers and anti-fouling membranes. And so what she had been able to produce was some of the first data that I saw and that I used in my story building, right? This has a membrane that is already showing itself to do things that are completely unique and otherwise impossible. That was the genesis of what the story that we envisioned, but the process of getting the funding, going through the R&D and prototyping exercises to start building this at a larger scale, doing a lot of that go-to-market research, sourcing all sorts of colorful, fragrant fluids from every industry you could imagine, and running benchtop simulations of what the treatment scheme would look like, and then eventually full-scale manufacturing, building quality programs, having the team get built around this so that we could deliver this not just on a one-time basis, but with the service and support required to really make sure customers were successful. That took some time, right? We founded the company about 4.5 years ago, and we had our first commercial plant running in October of 2021. with a lot of our early products getting piloted earlier in 21. So that scale up exercise is maybe my first place I'd point to where a lot of good technology and a lot of inspired ideas can really struggle to find the funding to get that early product market validation and to have the right collection of skill sets and focus to get you to those milestones that show this is no longer just an idea of value creation, but you're actually getting to see it, live, and that builds a lot of confidence in the investment community with your stakeholders. So for a lot of hardware companies, a lot of companies in the clean tech space, getting those first commercial points of validation so critical to crossing some of the thresholds that often can point to companies making it. From an adoption standpoint, it can really vary. It really depends on the needs of your customers, right? So a lot of our applications can take time to pilot, time to get the equipment built, time to have all of that commissioned and operating. So it's not a flip a light switch and suddenly you can get these membranes running. But one of the things that I've seen that I've been really proud of and really impressed by with the customers and partners we work with is they never need to be convinced that water reuse is a good idea. There's no questioning in folks' minds. This is not just an ESG or an environmental nice to have. This is a license to operate. I need water into my plant because my groundwater wells are drying up, or I'm trucking away my water in tanks or tanker trucks, and it's horribly inefficient and really expensive, and there's challenges with city ordinances about those trucking fleets, or there's new regulation coming down and I need to get out in front of it to continue running. So what we're seeing is this impressive momentum building from our end users around the desire to try and look for new technologies. And our mission, our mandate is to give them a way to understand what's possible in as simple a business model and as simple of a validation exercise as possible, because they're motivated. People really want to see technology put to work, and they're willing to take those risks. It's been really good to work with our customers.
It's incredible, and I was going to ask about the incentives from the customer standpoint, but it sounds like that they're fully focused on repurposing and reusing water, and it seems like there's so many more elements that actually keep that top of mind for them, not only for the personal business, expansion and growth and operation, but also externally and the external factors that they deal with. Tell us a little bit about the traction with ZwitterCo. So you had the first commercial plant up and running in October 2021, which is so exciting to see. Where are you at now? How many more up and running operations do you have, and what's the excitement about next year? What are your goals and your ambitions to continue that scale and growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So between projects that are either up and running or that we have won and will be running soon, the company already has over 3 million gallons a day of treatment capacity across more than a dozen installations. So 3 million gallons a day pretty quickly turns into something like 1 billion gallons a year of treated and recovered water, which it's such a cool moment to get to be able to actually appreciate the volumes that we're talking about. That said, it's still a drop in the bucket. There's so much more out there, both from the folks that know today that they need advanced tools for treatment and reuse, as well as the growing population of folks who are coming to realize it as water scarcity and the cost of water become more present and rapidly more concerning threats to their business. So the water market as a whole is growing really fast because we're seeing such a rapid onset of both public attention and starting to see some of the painful effects of climate change presenting themselves, not in 5-10 years we're going to be in trouble. Trouble's here in a lot of places around the world. So from that standpoint, we're really excited to capitalize on these first installations. We have a lot of marquee projects that are like some of the largest in the world for what they are, and being able to share those stories and build the momentum behind those installations hopefully will help us with the rapid growth and adoption that we're looking for. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of really positive momentum building is with our partnerships. So ZwitterCo as a go-to-market model, we make the membranes, we make the thing that does the filtering, but the equipment that is required to run these projects and to get installed in these facilities to capture the water and send it through likely many different stages of processing, often that is a job in our value chain that is filled by the technology integrator or the solutions integrator that does, sometimes with some of their own technologies, sometimes with other technologies they piece together from other vendors, put together a complete solution for the end user. And we have built now a couple really successful partnerships with folks that are familiar with what our technology does, sees how we can enable them to provide their customers with more efficient tools. Are starting to put a lot of commercial resources behind building that into their scheme of offerings that they bring to the marketplace. So it's a really helpful distribution process for us. It helps us learn and get to know the needs in the marketplace and have other companies that can expose us to the needs that we on our own wouldn't be able to fully visualize. And it's a great meeting of minds when you've got another stakeholder where you've got these complementary business models, and that stakeholder is just as motivated and just as mission driven about bringing solutions to the market and trying to make an impact in water. So it's a great cohort to get to work with.
That's amazing. It sounds like there's so much just cooperation in just making this process successful. It's not one product. It's not one piece of technology. It's not one partner. It's everyone kind of working on a particular goal, which I feel like as a business is probably very much exciting because it's not relying on one or two features or factors, but it's also probably a little bit heavy. Incorporating so many partners into completing a certain objective.
Rising tide floats all ships is the really cliche analogy for anyone in the water space. But really, we are hoping to all see both startups that want to pave a path for future investment into this space and to prove that the deployment and development of innovations in hardware, in digital infrastructure, in new financial models can all be the stepping stones that future entrepreneurs can get to then follow more efficiently so we can continue this growing innovation in this space. We see a lot of, again, our partners that are very excited and growing rapidly and pouring resources themselves. We see other folks that are maybe outside of the water industry starting to really pool resources into this for the first time. Infrastructure funds that might have been familiar building solar arrays or other major capital projects are now looking at water infrastructure as this critical set of assets that will never stop being necessary, have collateral value, and the momentum at the government level, the public level is all there to support investments like this. So the wheels are turning. It can be a challenging web to really navigate, to appreciate how many different players, how many permutations of, well, an integrator in this country is focused on these things because of that country's regulations, but in this place it's different, or this partner has something that they do as part of their scope and another partner doesn't. And so trying to piece together how to make the most efficient route for all the people who have different scope that they have expertise in to work most collaboratively, I will admit that is not a trivial exercise. But rarely have I ever met someone who wants to close the door in your face about having a conversation about how you could work together. I mean, it's a very spirited. And going back to the very first thing we talked about on this podcast, when you're out in the outdoors, when you're doing environmental stuff, when you're hiking, when you're out on a river, people want to have a great experience together. I think there's a translation into the clean tech industries as a professional setting. People want to see everyone succeed. There's always competitive limitations to being in a capitalist world, but the spirit behind what everyone's trying to do, I find very positive.
That's amazing. What are some of the biggest risks that ZwitterCo faces today?
Well, growth has all sorts of challenges to it. The company just reached 50 people, so 50 employees in the team, and just from a from a human psychology standpoint, we're all learning and growing together as to how we can be most efficient with our team and our tools, our resources. So anytime you're going through rapid growth like that, you have to be very conscientious about the way you think about roles and responsibilities, the way that you grow leaders, the way that you build cultural habits and practices that don't just require the leadership or the folks who founded the company to be the ones trying to build expectations, but the company itself grows and sustains those expectations of one another. And that's what really leads to a scalable organization. So we're trying to, as we think about rapid deployment of technology and providing services to customers, it's also make sure that we're going to be successful partners, not just tomorrow and the day after, but in years to come as we grow. And of course, we are, we're a venture-backed company. There's very high expectations on growth for our organization. So from a risk standpoint, there has been a historical risk aversion or slowness to the water industry that new inspired entrepreneurs are going to work on growing their businesses as quickly as possible. But it's always risky to try and take a tough industry with a lot of entrenched ways of thinking and
Yeah.
to make changes on technology and business models and all sorts of stuff. So it's an industry that is excited to change, but it'll take a lot of collective effort.
Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for ZwitterCo?
Treat all the water that there is, capture and reuse. So quite seriously, our moonshot is big, right? That if
Yeah.
industrial agricultural water is coming out of a pipe, right? If it's in a centralized collected facility and it's coming out of a pipe, we want to treat it and provide the tools and path for someone to reuse it, right?
Yeah.
Food, fuel, manufacturing, doesn't matter what the industries are, because the volume of water that we need to continue growing as a society and to not let all these other sustainable industries. You think about plant-based protein, you think about renewable natural gas, you think about green chemicals. There are a lot of other spaces that are also trying to innovate and be more sustainable. And ZwitterCo's sort of job in life is to make sure that none of those industries are constrained because of water. We want to help create this future of water abundance where everyone who's inspired to solve these problems, can think about we have a way to make sure that water is also managed as effectively as we can in their facilities.
Yeah. As a founder, I guess day to day or week by week, what do you find yourself focusing on the most, and what would you like to put more time into?
Day by day, week by week, what am I focused on? Well, what's on fire? The the thing that I'd say is a newfound opportunity for me in my position that I'm really enjoying. Part of it's having conversations with folks like you is we have intentionally tried to make sure we had products running with reliability in these industries before there was too much fanfare and too much expression to the world about what this technology was, because it's different. It has been met with and brains aren't supposed to do that. They're not supposed to work in those spaces. And we really wanted to make sure we had the substance to back up the claims we were making. Now that we have raised some of the financing that we have these commercial deployments. A lot more of my time and my mandate has been to be the spokesperson, sharing this with the world and engaging with a lot of the Q&A from the industry that helps others understand where we can fit in, how our brand is growing, and where they can think about working with us and where those collaboration points can come from. So it's a great new challenge for me to be able to take this story and this team that I have been so proud to work with and all of the internal development that's happened, and now shift the direction externally and be a spokesperson for my team's amazing work, and grow the narrative of what ZwitterCo can be.
That's amazing. And is there anything that you would like to put more time into?
Is there anything I'd like to put more time into? Yeah, figuring out how to have more time in the day, because there's just always more water to treat.
Yeah.
I think one of the places where I'd like to be able to engage most is, again, in sort of the public discussion.
Yeah.
We are now reaching the point where some of our customers want to work with us on engaging with the regulatory agencies that help govern the way they run their facilities. Or we see all of this new legislature coming out about the way that funds are being allocated to improve infrastructure, or the way that we're trying to deal with cutbacks or shortages or manage some of these challenges. And obviously, ZwitterCo is still a very small entity in this space, but we'd like to be able to at least provide the information about how new technology can solve some of these problems and be able to have a voice in those conversations.
Yeah.
So there's a right time for it, and it's, again, you got to focus on what's in front of you, and you got to focus on what's 5 years out and everything in between. But I think being more engaged in that global sort of conversation about water is definitely something that we'll be angling for as we get bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to ask this next question to really get also some gems of knowledge for the audience, but selfishly for my research purposes. But whether it was early in your career or now, is there any or what books or people have influenced you the most?
What books or people have influenced me the most? So I have never just personally been the kind of person who sort of watches my idols from afar and tries to learn from them, from the content and media that is shared publicly. Um, I'm a young CEO, and I've learned a lot of what I've learned through the mentors and advisors that I work with all the time. So I have a wonderful collection of alumni from the Tufts University ecosystem, folks from the Greentown Labs ecosystem up here in Boston, other serial entrepreneurs or founders in water, in clean tech and hardware. And the folks who have inspired me the most are the ones who have continued to grow and run up the learning curve for their respective companies' needs or industry, sort of adapting themselves to new challenges as quickly as the needs of their organization adapt. And I think about the opportunity I get and the real privilege it is to have some of the advisors I work with be so generous with their time and their feedback. And sometimes it means that you're sort of getting forged on the anvil. It's not always a fun process to have the feedback that you need to hear be delivered, but man, is it valuable. So it's sort of my message to any young entrepreneur, and certainly the way that I've grown the fastest has been surround yourself with brilliant people who have done what you're trying to do and have seen the next chapters that come, and don't be afraid to share what you're working on with them in as transparent, vulnerable ways you can, because those ideas and the critique that you'll receive is just so valuable to venture building. It's that continual revision of your thinking based on outside content it's a really valuable skill to hone.
Yeah. That little piece that you said at the end really resonated with me, which is like share your idea and be very much as transparent as possible with what you can, because I think that's where a lot of early founders or people who are thinking about founding companies are so tight-lipped about what they're going to be working on with their idea or the problem that they're looking to solve. Out of maybe it's a fear of being the idea being stolen, but it's hard to steal somebody else's idea versus just work off something you're passionate about. You'd have to have so much resources and shift your focus, to honing in on that, because it's hard to build. And so I love that, you're very much in practice of sharing and exploring through conversations, because I think, that's right. I think that's what founders should do. And that's where a lot of the unsolicited but really good advice comes from.
The professor who ran the program in grad school that where ZwitterCo was founded had a great line that I've always loved, which is that you can't look smart and be learning at the same time.
Tough
So
one.
sometimes you just have to be learning, and that
Yeah.
means you're going to ask questions, and sometimes you're going to look kind of stupid,
Yeah.
but it's always worth it.
I like that. You can't look smart and learn at the same time. I'm definitely going to use that. And I'm stealing it now on record.
Absolutely.
Uh, I love it. I love it. Well, Alex, I know we're close to the end of the show here, and I always like to give my guests a chance to give us your plugs. Let us know where we can support, where we can learn more about sustainability technology, about ZwitterCo, what your website, your LinkedIn, your Twitters. Where can we get involved and learn more? And if we're excited about as a potential partner, reach out and start using the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, the website is a great place to start. It's ZwitterCo.com. Please do follow us on LinkedIn. We've got a really terrific team running our social accounts, and we've got a lot of good content coming out, both news, press, interesting articles we're seeing, ways the technology is being used. And if there are any folks out there who have some pretty tough water and wastewater challenges, please do reach out. We are always growing the base of applications that we work on, and we absolutely love working with our partners and customers. So please drop us a line and happy to get in touch.
Amazing. Well, I hope you enjoyed yourself, Alex, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Julian, this was a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.